I want to start with this question of why does the Republican Party constantly embrace poverty, disease, and death? Marco Rubio just came out and said he can't come to the State of the Union because it requires a COVID test, and he's too busy to take a COVID test. Right. Noel Castler, the comedian, the guy who outed Trump's drug abuse and diaper wearing, he asked, how come everything the Republican Party stands for involves other people dying? And he talked about assault weapons and opposition to masks and vaccines and opposition to saving the environment. And, of course, their all-out war on Obamacare and Medicare for all. He might have been being glib, but I did a deep dive yesterday, and I think that this also wraps around the Republican Party's support, at least over the last 6 years, for President Putin of Russia as well. Here are the items where red states lead blue states. These are you find more of this stuff in higher rates of this stuff in red states than in blue states. Spousal abuse, obesity, smoking, teen pregnancy, sexually transmitted diseases, abortion, bankruptcies and poverty, homicide and suicide, infant mortality, maternal mortality, forcible rape, robbery and aggravated assault, dropouts from high school, divorce, contaminated air and water, unskilled workers, opiate addiction and deaths, income and wealth inequality, parasitic infections, COVID deaths, and unvaccinated people, federal subsidies to the states, aka red state welfare, people on welfare, child poverty, homelessness, spousal murder, unemployment, deaths from auto accidents, and people living on disability. Now, what is it about the Republican Party that causes them to, unabashedly and unashamedly, up until the last arguably 24 hours, to support President Putin and also to not just tolerate all of these ills that I just laid out for you, but celebrate them? What is it, what is it in the party? Well, it turns out it's a couple of things. Number one, it's the Republican Party's embrace of racism. For example, there was just a bill before Congress. It looks like it passed both the House and Senate, and it'll become law. It's called the Emmett Till anti-lynching bill. Republican Andrew Clyde of Georgia voted against it. Republican Thomas Massie, the guy who famously, tweeted out a picture of him and his wife and his kids with assault weapons for Christmas, the Republican from Kentucky, he voted against it. Chip Roy, another whack job from Texas, a Republican member of the House, voted against the anti-lynching bill. Do you get this? This began in 1964 with Barry Goldwater saying that he would not sign on with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It went on steroids with Nixon's Southern strategy 4 years later in 1968. Reagan used it in the first speech of his campaign, of his official campaign for president in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where 3 civil rights workers were murdered, talking about states' rights. George Herbert Walker Bush doubled down on it with the Willie Horton ads. Donald Trump put it right up front, saying Mexicans are rapists and murderers and all this kind of stuff. So you've got that, number one, racism. Number two, prior to the 1980s, the white evangelical movement was pro-choice. So was Ronald Reagan, who signed the most liberal abortion bill in the nation as governor of California, and George Herbert Walker Bush and his wife Barbara, who were big supporters of Planned Parenthood. But the religious right was they really had their panties in a wad. They were really upset because the Supreme Court had banned preacher-led prayer in schools. Back in the 50s, ministers used to actually come into schools and lead the prayer. And in the 1970s, Jimmy Carter pulled the tax exemption of a bunch of privately run schools run by right-wing churches because they were explicitly racially segregated. So Jerry Falwell comes out with his moral majority. He started that in '78. And Paul Weyrich, who joined the Reagan campaign in 1980, the co-founder of the Heritage Foundation and the guy who said, I don't want everybody to vote. These guys got together with the Reagan campaign and said, being pissed off about losing our tax-exempt status is not going to get us votes. But abortion, we can turn this into an issue that will cut across race, class, everything, politics, and will win votes for Republicans. So let's become anti-abortion. So the evangelical right movement became anti-abortion. Reagan and Bush became anti-abortion. The GOP made this an issue. And, you know, this was the first major merger in the history of the United States between a political party and a religious movement, in this case, Jerry Falwell's. Republicans started talking about God. The word had only appeared twice in their party platform going all the way back to 1856. They adopted Falwell's call for a return to school prayer, hostility to sex education, rejecting women's rights, asserting patriarchy, and their open hatred of homosexuality. They were championing, now this is 1980, what today we call the culture wars. And then they went even farther down the rabbit hole. Now that they're a religious party, well, religion requires that you reject science. And so the Republican Party started rejecting science. In 2000, Mike Pence wrote an op-ed in Indiana saying, quote, despite the hysteria from the political class and the media, smoking doesn't kill. They started questioning evolution. The theory of evolution is now a question for the Republican Party. They were scoffing about the pollution of the cancers caused by pollution, air pollution, and other diseases. Rush Limbaugh and George H.W. Bush talked about pointy-headed liberals in ivy towers in universities in America, to openly trashing higher education to bring in blue-collar, uneducated voters. This was followed by a sustained attack by Republicans on public education itself, pushing for privatized charter schools. So all that happened. And then the other big turning point in the 1980s was when Reagan openly embraced America's oligarchs. Jimmy Carter had walked from the Capitol to the White House after his inauguration by way of saying he's with the average person. Ronald Reagan went back to the limousine, and his first inaugural ball was, it took a lot of money to participate in that thing. And the Republican Party has been there ever since, basically saying, hey, the TV preachers are now multimillionaires. We helped make them that. The billionaires have become, you know, when Reagan was elected, there wasn't a single billionaire in America because we had a top 74% tax rate. Now we're infested with them. So Noel Castler was right, but there's a little more detail to this story, and now we're seeing why the Republican Party might be supporting Putin, or at least up until it just became politically toxic to do so in the last 48 hours, why they have been supporting Putin all along.